My phone buzzed at 2 a.m. and it was his mom calling, not him, and that's how I knew something was wrong before she even said a word. I almost didn't pick up. I remember staring at the screen at her name lighting up my dark bedroom, thinking maybe it was a butt dial, maybe she meant to call someone else. Mothers don't call their son's best friend at 2 in the morning for no reason. Danny, her voice was doing that thing where someone's trying so hard to sound calm that it makes everything worse. It's Wheeze, he fell off the Cameron's roof, he's at St. Luke's, I need you to come. I don't remember getting dressed. I remember being in my car, still in the driveway, keys in my hand, and not remembering how I got there. Wheeze and I had been friends since we were 9 years old, since the day he threw up on my shoes at a birthday party and cried harder about it than I did about my ruined sneakers. 20 years of friendship. 20 years of him being the one constant thing in a life that moved around a lot, different apartments, different jobs, one bad breakup after another that he always helped me clean up after. He was the guy who showed up. That was just who he was. So when I walked into that hospital waiting room and saw his mother sitting there with her hands pressed flat against her knees like she was trying to hold herself together through sheer physical pressure, something in me went very quiet and very focused, the way you get when panicking isn't an option yet. They're saying his hip's broken in 2 places, she told me, and his wrist, he's got a concussion, they don't know about internal stuff yet. I sat down next to her and I didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that would have mattered, and we just waited. 3 hours. I watched the clock on the wall move so slowly I started to hate it a little. When they finally let us back, Wheeze looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. He was 6'2", built like someone who worked outside for a living because he did, and lying in that bed with tubes and a brace around his hip, he looked like someone had let the air out of him. His eyes found me before they found his mom. "Hey," he said, his voice was wrecked from whatever they'd given him. "Did you feed my dog?" That was it. That was the first thing he said to me after falling 4 stories off scaffolding. Not "Am I going to be okay?" Not "I'm scared." He asked about his dog. I laughed and it came out wrong, more like a sob that decided to wear a laugh's clothes. "Yeah, man, I fed Biscuit. You're an idiot, you know that." Learning that in real time, yeah. His mom had to leave 2 days later. She had my little sister's exact opposite problem, a job in another state she couldn't just abandon, 2 other kids at home who needed her too. She sat me down in the hospital cafeteria before she left and she took both my hands in hers, which she'd never done before, not in 20 years of knowing me. "He can't be alone right now," she said, "and I can't be here. I know that's not fair to ask you." "You're not asking me anything," I said. "I already decided. I want to be honest about something because this isn't the kind of story where I'm going to pretend I saw it coming, where I'm going to tell you I always knew deep down that there was something more there. I didn't. I loved Wheeze the way you love your oldest friend, the specific unglamorous kind of love that's built out of 10,000 small things, inside jokes so old neither of us remembered the origin anymore, the exact way he took his coffee, the fact that he was the only person who could tell when I was lying about being fine. I wasn't lying to myself about anything when I told his mother I'd take care of him. I genuinely thought I was just being a good friend. I didn't know yet that 6 weeks of being someone's whole support system does something to you. Nobody warns you about that part. The first week home was the hardest, and not for romantic reasons, for extremely unromantic reasons involving a hospital bed set up in his living room, learning how to help someone use a bedpan without either of you dying of embarrassment, and We's being furious about all of it in a way that had nowhere to go except at me, because I was the only person there. "I don't need you to cut my food," he snapped at me on day 4 over dinner when I absent-mindedly started slicing his chicken because his wrist was in a cast and he was struggling and not saying anything about it. "Okay," I set the knife down, "cut it yourself then." He tried. It took him 4 minutes and he ended up flinging a piece of chicken clean off the plate and onto the floor, and Biscuit lunged for it, and We's made this sound, half laugh, half something closer to crying, and put his face in his good hand. "I hate this," he said, muffled. "I hate this so much, Danny." I picked the chicken up off the floor before the dog could get it, sat back down, and I didn't say anything comforting because I didn't have anything comforting that wouldn't have sounded fake. Instead, I just said, "I know, eat your dinner. I'll cut the rest and you can be mad about it, that's allowed." He looked up at me, eyes wet, jaw tight, and something in his face loosened just slightly. "You're annoyingly good at this. Cut chicken." He waved his good hand vaguely, not making it weird. I didn't know yet that it was going to get weird anyway. Nobody does at the moment. That's the thing about this whole story that I keep coming back to. There wasn't a single day I could point to and say that's when it started. It was more like a tide coming in. You don't notice the water moving, you just notice eventually that your feet are wet. The physical stuff was the strangest part, if I'm being real with you. Not in a scandalous way, I mean the plain, practical intimacy of taking care of an injured body that used to just be your friend's body. Something you never thought about beyond he's tall or he needs a haircut. Now I was helping him shower, sitting on a stool outside the bathroom because his balance was shot, and he refused to let his mother hire a home health aide. "I'm not having a stranger see me like this," he said when I brought it up. "But I can. You're not a stranger." That logic didn't fully follow and we both knew it, but I let it go, because underneath the joking he meant something real by it, and I think we both felt it without nomming it. There's a difference between being seen by someone who's paid to see you and being seen by someone who chose to. The nights were long. He didn't sleep well, pain mostly, and the concussion messing with him for longer than the doctors expected, leaving him with headaches that came on fast and mean. I started sleeping on the couch a few feet from his hospital bed, not because I had to, technically, but because the first night I tried sleeping in the guest room, he called out for me around 3 a.m. in a voice that scared both of us, disoriented, not sure where he was, and after that I just didn't go back to the guest room. There was a night, maybe 3 weeks in, when he couldn't sleep and I couldn't either, and we ended up just talking in the dark the way you do as kids at a sleepover, except we were both grown men and one of us had a metal plate now holding his hip together. "Can I tell you something stupid?" he said. "Always." I was scared on the roof before I fell, like I felt it coming. There was this half second where I knew my footing was wrong and I couldn't fix it in time, and it felt so long, that half second. And the whole time falling I kept thinking one thing. "What?" I thought, I hope Danny's not working today, because if I die he's gonna feel guilty he didn't answer his phone or something. That's what I thought about. Not my mom, not anything normal, just I hope this doesn't mess with Danny's head. I sat there in the dark not knowing what to do with that. It landed somewhere in my chest and just sat there, heavy and warm at the same time. "You're an idiot," I said finally, because that was easier than the truth, which was that something in me had cracked open a little at hearing that. "Probably," he agreed. "Concussion doesn't help. You don't get to blame the concussion for everything. Watch me." We laughed quietly so we wouldn't wake Biscuit, who'd taken to sleeping curled against Wee's good side like he understood something was wrong and had appointed himself guard duty. I think that was the night I first noticed I was noticing things. The particular sound of Wee's laugh when it was real versus when it was performed for company. The way his hand, the good one, would sometimes just rest near mine on the blanket, close enough that I could feel the heat off his skin without either of us doing anything about it. I noticed, and then I very deliberately did not examine why I was noticing, because examining it felt like it would break something that was working. Weeks 5 and 6 were better physically. He could get around with a walker, then a cane. His humor came back sharper, meaner in the way that meant he was actually feeling okay again. We fell into a rhythm. Mornings were physical therapy exercises I helped him with. Afternoons were him getting stir-crazy and picking fights with me about nothing. Evenings were the two of us on the couch watching bad TV he pretended to hate and secretly loved. It was during one of those evenings that everything actually changed, though at the time it just felt like another Tuesday. We were watching some cooking competition show, half paying attention, and during a commercial he said out of nowhere, "You know you've basically put your whole life on hold for me, right?" "I haven't put anything on hold." "Danny, you haven't been on a date in 2 months. You used to complain to me constantly about your terrible Hinge matches and now there's just nothing. You go to work, you come here, you sleep on my couch. That's not a life." I shrugged, kept my eyes on the TV, which was a tell if he'd been paying close attention. "This is more important right now." "Why?" The question sat between us longer than a normal question should. "Because you do it for me," I said, which was true but wasn't the whole truth, and I think some part of me knew it wasn't the whole truth even as I said it. He was quiet for a second, then softer in a voice I hadn't heard from him before. "Not exactly. Yeah, I would, but that's not what I asked." I looked over at him then, and he wasn't looking at the TV either. He was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face in 20 years of knowing every expression his face was capable of making. It wasn't gratitude, exactly, though there was some of that in it. It was something closer to a question he was too scared to ask outright. "What?" I said, my voice coming out rougher than I meant it to. "Nothing." He looked away first, back at the TV, and the moment folded itself back up like it had never happened, and I spent the rest of the night not able to stop replaying it, turning it over, trying to figure out what it had actually been. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch a few feet from him, listening to his breathing even out into sleep, and I let myself think for the first time honestly about the fact that somewhere in the last 6 weeks, without my permission, my feelings for my best friend had reorganized themselves into something I didn't have a simple name for. Or, I did have a name for it. I just hadn't let myself say it, even inside my own head, because saying it meant it was real, and real meant I had to do something about it or spend the rest of our friendship pretending I hadn't. I want to tell you I handled it well. I did not handle it well. For the next week and a half I got weird. Distant in small ways I thought were invisible but definitely were not, shorter answers, finding excuses to run errands that took longer than they needed to, not meeting his eyes when we talked. I told myself I was giving him space now that he was more independent, that it was healthy, normal, the natural winding down of an intense caretaking period. We's noticed, of course he noticed, he'd known me since we were 9. "Are you mad at me?" he asked one evening, apropos of nothing, while I was pretending to be very interested in reorganizing his spice rack, which did not need reorganizing. "No, why would I be mad at you?" "Because you've been acting like a stranger for like 10 days, and I don't know what I did." I closed the cabinet, didn't turn around right away. "You didn't do anything." "Then what is it? Talk to me. You've been here for weeks taking care of me. Don't go weird on me now. That's not fair, Danny." He was right, it wasn't fair. I turned around and he was standing there, actually standing, cane in hand but upright, steady, so much better than he'd been, looking at me with real hurt on his face, the kind of hurt that comes from being shut out by the one person you didn't think would ever shut you out. "I don't know how to say it," I admitted. "Say what?" I could have lied. I'd had 10 days to build a lie and I hadn't built one because some stubborn part of me didn't want to lie to him, not about this, not after everything. So instead I said the truest, clumsiest version of it I had. "I think I'm in love with you. And I don't know when that happened, or if it's just this whole situation, everything being intense and it's messing with my head, or if it's real, but either way I've been walking around scared out of my mind that I'm gonna say something and lose you completely. So I've just been not saying anything, and that's obviously not working either, so." The silence after I said it was the longest silence of my life. Longer than the hospital waiting room, longer than the half-second he described falling. "Say something," I said, because I couldn't stand it anymore. "I'm trying to figure out if I'm hallucinating," he said. His voice cracked in the middle of it. "Because I've been trying to work up the nerve to say something almost exactly like that for like 2 weeks, and every time I almost do you get this look on your face like you're bracing for bad news, so I keep chickening out, and now you just said it first and I need a second." I stood very still. "Wait. Yeah. You what?" He laughed, shaky, one hand coming up to rub at his face. "The night we were watching the cooking show, when I asked why you'd put your life on hold, I was fishing. I wanted you to say something and you didn't, and I told myself I imagined the whole thing, that I was reading into it because I was high on pain meds and grateful and confused. I thought that same night I thought I imagined a moment too." "We're both idiots." "We're both idiots," I agreed. He took a step toward me, careful on the cane, and I met him halfway, and neither of us really knew what to do with our hands or where to look. Because 20 years of a certain kind of familiarity doesn't just smoothly convert into a new kind. There was a real physical awkwardness to it, his cast bumping my arm, him wincing slightly, and both of us freezing, worried we'd hurt him, and then both of us laughing at how unromantic that was. "This is not how I pictured this going," he said, close enough now that I could feel his breath. "How'd you picture it?" "Less me being an invalid, more me sweeping you off your feet, ideally. Instead you're basically holding me up right now." "I don't mind holding you up." "Yes. I've been doing it for 6 weeks, I'm used to it." He looked at me for a long moment, something vulnerable and open on his face that I'd rarely seen on him even in 20 years. And then he leaned in slow, giving me every chance to pull back if I wanted to, and I didn't want to, not even a little, and when we kissed it wasn't cinematic or perfect. His cane clattered against the coffee table, Biscuit started barking at the commotion, and we actually laughed into the kiss, which made me laugh too. And we had to stop and start again because we were both grinning too hard to do it properly. "This is the worst first kiss in recorded history," he said. "It's kind of perfect, actually. You're just saying that." "I'm not. I don't think I wanted some big cinematic thing. I think I wanted this, messy and ours and real. I won't pretend everything after that was smooth because it wasn't, and honestly, I think that's the part people don't tell you about stories like this." There were hard conversations in the weeks that followed, about whether this was really new feelings or just intensity and adrenaline talking, about what it would mean for the friend group who'd known us both for years, about his family, about mine, about all the ordinary fear that comes with turning the most stable relationship in your life into something with an entirely new kind of risk attached to it. There was one bad night, maybe a month later, when he got scared and pulled away for almost a week, told me he needed space to think, and I genuinely thought I'd lost him, thought I'd traded 20 years of friendship for a few good weeks and then broke the whole thing by wanting more. He showed up at my apartment at 11 at night, cane still in hand though he barely needed it by then, and stood in my doorway looking like he hadn't slept. "I got scared," he said before I could even say anything. "'Cause if this doesn't work, I don't just lose a boyfriend, I lost you. And you're the person I call when everything else in my life is falling apart, and the idea of losing that terrified me so much I almost threw away the best thing that's happened to me trying to protect myself from a version of losing you that I made up in my head." "You're not gonna lose me," I said. "Even in the worst case. Even if this somehow doesn't work, which I don't think it won't, but even if I'm not going anywhere, Wheeze, I've had 20 years of practice not going anywhere." He came inside and we talked until almost 3 in the morning, really talked, more honestly than either of us had let ourselves before. And somewhere in that conversation the fear started to loosen its grip on both of us, replaced by something steadier. It's been a little over a year now. He's fully healed, you'd never know looking at him unless you knew to look for the faint scar along his hip, or unless it rains and his leg aches a little, which he complains about theatrically because he knows it makes me fuss over him, which he still, even now, pretends to hate. Sometimes I think about that night his mom called, how I almost didn't answer, how an entire life I didn't know I was going to have was on the other side of a phone call I almost let go to voicemail. I think about the version of me that stays asleep that night, that finds out about the accident the next morning from a text instead, that shows up a day late instead of racing to the hospital in whatever clothes I grabbed off my floor. I don't know what happens to that version of me. I don't know if he ever finds his way to this. I like to think he doesn't get as lucky. Weez asked me once, half joking, lying tangled up with me on a lazy Sunday morning, whether I'd go back and change any of it if I could, the fall, the broken hip, all 6 brutal weeks of it. "No," I told him, and I meant it completely. "I'd never wish that on you, but I'm not sorry about where it took us. I think some part of me had loved you for longer than I let myself admit, and it just took something breaking to make me stop pretending I didn't." "That's either the most romantic thing you've ever said to me," he said, "or deeply unhinged, and I genuinely can't tell which. Can it be both?" He kissed me instead of answering, which I've learned, over this last year, is usually his way of agreeing with me when he doesn't want to admit it out loud. I think about that phone call a lot still. 2 in the morning, his mother's voice trying so hard to stay steady. I think about how something that felt in the moment like the worst night of my life turned out to be the night everything I actually wanted quietly started walking toward me, one broken, complicated, unglamorous step at a time. Nobody tells you love can arrive disguised as a crisis. Nobody tells you that sometimes the person who's always shown up for everyone else is the one you end up spending the rest of your life showing up for. I still feed Biscuit every morning. Some habits, once they start, just don't stop.